Welcome to the Loving Lake Geneva podcast. I'm your host, Karen Stray Rappaport. Each episode, I take an outside the wake look at the area's most interesting people, places, and happenings. It's another great day here in Lake Geneva, and the lake looks stunning, so let's jump right in. Well, today we have with us someone who you rarely see kind of out in the wild if he's not working or with a client. This is the owner of Geneva Lakefront Realty, David Curry. Welcome, David.
Hi, Karen.
So happy you
Thanks
could
for having
join
me.
us. Oh, we're so happy. I know you're very busy and you're very kind of a private person. This isn't your favorite thing to do, but I appreciate you doing it. And I think everybody will enjoy hearing from you because they read your words, but they don't often hear your words. So appreciate this. So
Of course.
let's
Yeah.
let's just start with this like ridiculousness of the accolades because there's so many that I don't know. I just had to kind of sum it up. We could go year by year, but this last year you sold $108 million, correct?
It's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, something in that area. And the next highest agent was like $40 million behind that. So you
Yeah.
really kind of stand out a little bit there, David. And you recently reached a lifetime total of over $1 billion. So congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I that was a good one. And much to our fellow realtors' chagrin, I had told myself many years ago, I said, well, you know what? I'm going to stop doing this when I hit like 1 billion because that's like a nice like round number, but I'm not gonna. So
No, well, you
I
better
I
not stop.
I have to keep going. But anyway, yeah, it's all good. It's very nice to hit those numbers for sure.
Well, and you've had this reputation for a very long time. I mean, when I was practicing real estate in Illinois before I moved up here full time, I knew of you, everybody knew of you, my family knew of you. You were like this kind of celebrity. And when I moved here, I kind of wanted to, just talk to you, pick your brain, but I was too intimidated.
No, stop.
I was. And now that I know you, I shouldn't have been. But, we
No.
just knew you from a distance as like this real estate king up here and that was untouchable. So I feel extremely honored to be working for you now. And it's a dream come true for me, really.
Oh,
And
stop.
it
You know
is.
what, Karen, it's very nice of you to say, but it's a you know, I was glad that you were willing to come work with me because you know this, I'm sort of the anti-realtor, right? Even though I'm a realtor. And I would say, you know, knowing you and your family's, legacy and history in the business, I think that's really interesting. And, like we talked about before, with my dad having sold real estate on a very part-time basis, uh, and then your, of course, family. It's interesting. I like being around folks that are not Johnny come latelys to this business, like that are opportunistic. Oh, I watched a real estate show on television, and those guys all drive Bentleys, so I'm going to sell real estate now. Like I don't like that, and so your legacy, I think, is good. I like it, so that's why you work with me because I like what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And that's interesting that we have that in common. For those who don't know, my father, along with my aunt and uncle, started Koenig& Stray back in 1967. And then I moved up here and met you and found out that you kind of have the same roots. So tell us about that. Like your father started Geneva Lakefront Realty, and how did you get involved?
Yeah, my dad, it's interesting about my dad. I've spent sort of like my whole life like trying to, kind of impress upon people that like I'm not doing what I'm not sort of where I am, wherever that might be because of my dad. I spent a lot of time trying to like pretend that wasn't the case. And as I get older and as my dad gets older, I sort of recognize that, my dad very much shaped sort of what I do and who I am and how I approach the business, really. And not always in a way that was like what you would think. It wasn't always like, well, my dad told me to do this, so I do it. And now look, it's more, a lot of it was my dad told me to do this and I didn't do it. And now look, and so my dad, my parents moved up to the lake on a part-time basis in the late 60s. They were school teachers that had met at Illinois State and went and got their master's degrees at University of Illinois together. And when they did that, when they were either doing that or just after they did it, they bought a little cottage in Williams Bay on Spring Street, which is just a block up from the lake on Walworth, off of Walworth Avenue. And they would come up here. My dad had some exposure to the lake through, I think, one of his cousins or uncles or somebody in their family had either a cottage in Williams Bay, kind of in the backside of the bay over there by like maybe Oakwood Street, Cherry Street over there. So my dad had some exposure to like my mom is from Princeton, Illinois. She didn't. But they had this little cottage they bought and they would come up on the weekends and, they would wait tables at the Shore Club, which is, of course, what is now the Geneva Inn. And so, my parents both being school teachers, there was this common thing back then, which I don't think is as common now, which is that school teachers got the summer off and they were expected to work. Mm-hmm. It was, you don't just get to have the summer to hang out at the lake, right? So my dad, knowing that, after a while anyway, started to sell real estate. And he started this company and he, picked the name, which
is brilliant.
I've written before as very presumptuous, right? Like you're just like a school teacher from Niles, Illinois, that happened to move to the lake, and now you're Geneva Lakefront Realty, like it's some prestigious thing. But so my dad started selling real estate in 1977, and so I grew up in a household where my dad was a school teacher, but also sold real estate, and it wasn't. If my dad had to provide for a family based on selling real estate back then, that wouldn't have worked, but it was always a part-time thing. He would come home from school at lunchtime, check his answering machine. His office was a desk in our living room for most of my childhood. And so I had that exposure to it through my dad, but not like in a professional way, more in like hey, it's Saturday and, we've got to go mow lawns, and then we're going to maybe, grill some hot dogs at the lake here. My parents happened to bought a house on the lake in 1970, which was a great idea. And then, my dad would go out and show a house. Like, so we were aware of it, but it wasn't like his main gig, right? And so fast forward to 1996, I'm a senior in high school, I guess 95, I graduated in early 96. And so I didn't want to go to college. My parents weren't going to pay for it. I didn't, as an odd thing, my parents both being educators with, very sort of interesting academic histories, didn't really encourage us to go to school. I don't really know why in hindsight. It's something, and they don't explain it now anyway. I asked them and they can't really explain it, but there was no college paid for, and I wasn't particularly an academic or wasn't good at it anyway. And so real estate seemed like an easy thing to do when I was 17 years old. And like, well, I can't go to school. I think I was enrolled. I think I actually was accepted to the very prestigious school called the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. And I think I went, in hindsight, I'm thinking back 30 years ago now, I think I went to like an orientation, but then I like never went. I don't know how that all worked. But anyway, so I started selling real estate. I went to real estate, quote, school, which, is silly, as you know, when I was a senior in high school. And some realtors that are still selling real estate today in Lake Geneva were in that class with me, which is kind of funny. And I graduated high school in May, and I got my real estate license, I think, in July. And that was it. And then I, quote, started selling real estate. So that's sort of how it all started for me.
And it's funny how you named it Geneva Lakefront Realty, and then it's like, you build the name and you will make it happen because you're the Geneva Lakefront guy. So
well, that's,
it ended up being perfect.
And as I'm sure, Karen, like I started when I was 18. I didn't have, there was no business. Like it's, one of the things that's interesting about the lake is most people in this business have some variety of connection to the lake itself through social circles, right? So, maybe you were on the water safety patrol in high school or, maybe you hung out at Chuck's all summer, your whole college age or, beyond. I didn't. Like I tell people, and it's not a joke, I didn't know what Gordy's was until I was probably 20 years old. Like we weren't a family that was like, well, let's go watch the sailboat races, right? We were just like living here, and like we mowed lawns, and then like on Sundays we went to church, and then like we went to school on Monday. It was just like there wasn't that lake sort of connection to the, we'll call it the, more elite sort of social networks. And so when I started selling, I didn't have any connections, right? It was like I'd sell a house to someone in my parents' church for $72,000, like in Sharon, and then, someone would have a lot to sell in Williams Bay for $28,000, and like I would list it and then sell it. And so, that was kind of how it started. Didn't start with a book of business. There was no like, here's who you call. It was just you're 18 years old. You have shirts from the Van Heusen outlet in Kenosha and go sell real estate. So that's how it started. And it took a very, very long time for me to sort of find traction in the business here.
And what, I mean, in addition to coming from the background, with your father, what do you think? I know you're going to hate this question, but why do you think you're so good at this?
Well, I don't think I'm good at it. I think that's one thing. I don't think anyone's particularly good at it, to be honest. Not yourself, of course, excluded. I think the business. I'll put it like this. I think there's, and you and I have talked about this before. I think where my relative, whatever local modest successes come from is I don't think every person wants to be treated like they're a customer of a gimmicky realtor. And so like I don't talk to people like I famously make fun of open houses, right?
Mhm.
Like and we still do them once in a while because they're necessary evils sometimes. But like, you know, I don't list a house and then every 21 and a half days drop the price 1.2%. And then I don't do brokers open where I give away like free gas station sushi gift cards. Like I don't like the gimmick part of the business. And I think I have enough self-awareness to know that I can't engage in that anyway. And I think there's a sect of consumer that also feels the same way, right? And so if you walk into a showing that I'm at, this, we sold a house together before you worked with me. I'm not like opening the cabinets, telling them how wonderful and beautiful they are, and can't they imagine their kids having s'mores at the fire pit? Like I don't speak that way. Matter of fact, I sit down in chairs at showings, as I think you might know, and I let people wander around. Like, and I think not every consumer wants that. Some people actually want to be coached and they fall for the sort of red carpet smiley open house thing. But I think there's a reasonably large percentage of people that don't. They want to be treated like adults. They want information that they can't get through agents that are not attached to the market. They don't want grifters that showed up here in the last decade because like, it seemed like a good idea, and so I think that's where I fit into this market in that niche is sort of my thought.
Yeah, and I think people just they love how genuine you are and the way you make connections with people is amazing. Somebody has a need out there, you're going to do whatever you need to do to fill that need for that person, whether it's a buyer or a seller. But just watching your relationship with your clients is it's something to see.
Well,
It's a real
that's
genuine
nice of you to say.
relationship, and they know that you're in this for the right reasons, and you're not gimmicky, and that does make you stand out, and your knowledge is unmatched for sure.
Well, and
But
I think, Karen, I think part of that is just I also I look at my own history in this business and I think I sold real estate every day from early August of 1996 until today. Like I haven't done anything else. Like I didn't get into another business. I wasn't a builder. I didn't open a restaurant. I didn't want to have a paddleboard rental company. I have no interest in anything else. And I look at folks that are in the business that have been in it even for longer periods of time. And I think, I don't think you can fully know this business, fully know this market, fully represent a client's best interests unless you've both been doing it for a very long time and doing it at a very high level for that time. I don't think you can take your eye off this market because it's so weird, it's so nuanced, it's so small. And it's not to say that folks in the business aren't going to have some success here and there, because they certainly do, or I'd sell every house, right? But I think there's something to be said for duration, and just kind of hanging in there. And I feel like that's what I've done. So
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people read your blog that you have on the Geneva Lakefront Realty website. And I always thought you had a ghostwriter. I'm like, no way. Is he this talented of a writer? Like he has to have
it's
a ghost.
not, it's just,
But
it's
you
just a
do
bunch
this.
of gibberish.
No, I mean, they're entertaining. They are, full of great information, and just the sense of humor is outstanding. So, tell us about like what made you start writing that? How often do you write it? How do you come up with your ideas?
It's truthfully, it's fallen off a lot over the last few years. And when I started that, I think I probably tried to start it in like 2005, maybe. And I think at the time, again, back to sort of the gimmickry part of real estate, right? I think at the time, and you'll remember this, like the concept of a blog, I even hate the name, but the concept of a blog was pretty new back then, right? And I also joke to people like if I had not decided to write a real estate blog specifically about Lake Geneva and I just wrote like I don't know, a cooking blog, I'd probably be like, on Food Network right now. So I probably made a mistake by choosing real estate to write about. But I started it because it felt like a way for someone with a small company that didn't have a real sort of, built-in client base to kind of just reach out and say what I thought about the market. And I started it very sporadically. I didn't know what to write. I felt very self-conscious about it. Like it felt like if I write something, and I still struggle with this, if I write something that someone doesn't like, someone's going to get mad at me. And that still happens all the time, by the way. Like the actual hate mail that I get is unbelievable. And so it's anyway, I'm flattered, I guess, by it. But
Right.
so I started it then and then wrote a little bit here and there. And then the market started getting a little bit weird, obviously, as you'll remember very well, in '08. And between '08 and call it 2011, I started to find a little bit more of a groove in terms of what I thought I wanted to say. I also around that time felt like I'd been selling real estate for long enough to actually understand the market, which I would fully admit when I started in 1996 until 2000, let's say in 10, the lakefront market, which is what I sort of aspired to, but I had no means by which to figure out how to get into it. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand how the connections were made. I didn't understand who the buyers necessarily were or how to attract them. And so the blog basically took and found its bearing and direction, I'd say, in 2010, 11, 12, and 13. And what happened, and I can say this to you now because it's long enough in the past, I was very negative. Like I'm pessimistic by nature, as you probably very well know. It's probably quite obvious. Um, but I was very negative on the market. And so there were agents around here that were publicly advertising in 2010 and 11 that the market was fine and everything was great and Lake Geneva's different. And I mean, I went out and would write blogs and say, no, the market's terrible. It's getting worse. Your house is worth less today than it was yesterday. And tomorrow it's going to be worth less than it is today. And so I kind of kept doing that and it resonated. mostly with buyers at first, right? Because I was sort of anti-inventory. I was negative supply. And over those next few years, it caught the attention of enough people that I started to build a business. And that's really what happened. And so from 2010, I had a very loyal customer of mine buy a large house on the lake. And I tried to sort of approach that as, instead of it being a one-off, right? I tried to kind of make it seem like it was a pattern. And fortunately, it became a pattern. So
And then you also have your beautiful magazine that you put out. So tell us what inspired you to do that, and when is the next issue coming out?
yeah. So the magazine was interesting. Started, I think, at the same time. Magazine started in 2010, and the actual reason for that magazine was I was starting to write this blog more. I was starting to see some. I could, you can watch your page views, right? And so I starting to see that it was getting a lot of traction. And I was sort of trying to figure out, like, how do I get this to folks that are not Googling the market here, right? Like, how do I get it to the 77-year-old couple that lives in, Glenwood Springs, that they're not going to be online looking for what I want to say. So I I printed, I think the first year was summer of 2010, I think. I'm pretty sure. It was very thin. It was like a pamphlet. Um, I think I have some around still. It's quite embarrassing, actually, the way it looks. And I remember speaking to my dad. I remember talking to my dad about it, and I can picture it. I went to his house, and he was sitting in his chair, which unfortunately he sits in like all day now. And he's watching the news or something. I walk in and I say, "All right, here's an idea. This is what I think I'm going to do." Because my dad was always sort of like peripherally involved in the business, but he what I was doing day to day, he had no idea and didn't really care. I mean, certainly he'd review his documents, of course, if the DSPS is listening, but he wasn't really engaged. And so I went there, and he was sitting in his chair, and I handed him some stuff. I said, "All right, here's my idea. I'm going to print a magazine, and I'm just going to take, like, I don't know, 8 or 10 or 12 blog posts throughout the year. I'll polish them up, put them with some photographs. I'll put some listings in there. And instead of paying $2,000 a page to put an ad in a local glossy, I'll try to sell some ads and see if I can get this cost down to where I get my own magazine." And so I started it then. It was a struggle, right? It was not easy. That magazine, I think I've done 18 issues. I've lost a significant amount of money on every single one. It doesn't make me money. And I think ultimately it turned out to be a good thing. It started out as kind of a let's try it. And unfortunately, once you try it, if you stop doing it, like, people wonder what happened. And so,
And it's free to people. You know, they can get it in
right.
the coffee shops, the groceries, everywhere around here. And
Yeah,
they're just
it's
beautiful. They're beautiful to look
well,
at.
thank you. And I try to make them a little bit every year. It's not necessarily successful every year but I always try to make it a little bit better. This year, there's another wrinkle. I've, like, increased the page width a half an inch, which, trying to just make it again a little different than the other ones. And I can do that because I lose money on it. So it's not like I'm worried about the cost of it. I just think, well, let's just make it look cooler, and how much will that cost?
And
And
when's this
so,
one coming out?
yeah, I'm working on it now. I have to work on
When
it
it's
basically
done.
a little bit every day.
Yeah.
But they all print the few days before Memorial Day weekend. So I try to get them out sort of the Thursday before Memorial Day weekend. So that's the deadline coming my way. And it used to be better because my son used to go out and deliver them for me to all the places, and I would, like, give him, like, $100. Well, he's not here anymore. He lives in New York, as you know.
Yeah.
And so I have to do all that myself. And so actually, you know what, I should enlist you to help. So you can, I'll have them.
I was hoping you wouldn't go there, but yeah, no, I'm happy
Oh,
to.
for sure. Yeah, I'll have them drop off
I'm
the
good at
pallets at your
distribution.
house.
I can do that.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, it's on its way. It'll be out end of May, and it'll be the same stuff as always, which is just a collection of sort of listings that we have, listings that have sold, and some random stories about whatever nonsense I decide to put in there.
No, it's wonderful. All right. I want to talk about two controversial topics.
Yeah.
One is off-market listings. I just hear so much chatter about that. Like, that's not fair. Why do people do off-market listings? Don't you get a better price when you go on the market? So there's so many pros and cons to it. And I know you do a lot of off-market business. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Um, it is, you're right. I mean, it's probably the most sort of controversial topic in real estate at the moment. But it shouldn't be. And if you break down the process of selling real estate, think about it like this. What's the goal of listing a house? There's one single goal. What is it?
To sell it.
To sell it. And when a seller signs a listing agreement with you, they put a price on it. They put an offer of compensation on it. They put a duration, and you tell them what you're going to do. But the end result of that contract is they want a sale, right? And so if you look at an off-market listing, the only difference is there's no advertisement in a newspaper that's not going to work anyway. There's no open house with balloons and like a gift card to the bowling alley in Whitewater, right? And so, like, why not do off market? And the real reason I started doing a lot of it was during early parts of COVID. If you remember back to spring of 2020, um, which is really when the off-market phenomenon started in mass, right? There was a theoretical reason, which was sellers didn't want a bunch of people wandering through their house, right? So people that had some variety of COVID concerns thought, oh, well, I don't want an open house. I don't want a bunch of people sneezing on my door handles. So if you can sell it without that, go for it. So it had a fundamental reason early on. The reason I liked it better was because when pricing got very dislocated, which really started with a lot of momentum, I would say by June and July of 20, but didn't fully accelerate until maybe April to June of 21. Without pricing sort of obvious, indicators, right? How do we have price discovery, right? Where does that happen? We knew the market was hot. We knew buyers were motivated, but how do we know the pricing is accurate? And it's the struggle of real estate, right? Like, what's something actually worth? And so I started doing off markets then as a means to beta test pricing. So to say, okay, you have a lakefront, you think it's worth 7 million. 18 months ago, it was probably worth 5 million. Um, why don't we try to get 7 million? And let's try it for a month and see if we can get it by selling it, showing it rather to direct buyers that we know are in the marketplace. Because the lakefront market, by the way, you can't know every buyer for sure, right? You never know every buyer in the market. But when you're in it like I am, I have a sense of probably 80% of who the buyers are. Like who's got a buyer right now, who's working with somebody that's interested. You can never know all, but you can know most. And so it was like, well, let's price something, let's try it. And one of two things happen. Either the seller discovers that his pricing or her pricing is wrong because you show it to four people off market and they all say, you're crazy, this isn't worth this, or someone buys it. And if someone buys it, the seller gets their number. Now, the contrarian sort of approach to that is to say, well, yeah, but if you would put it on the market, you don't know how many other buyers might have bid on it. And sure, that's a valid point. But that sort of lacks understanding because you and I know, and anybody that does this business full time and with some variety of passion knows this. Days on market is detrimental to pricing, right? So if I'm going to list a property, I have value destruction within 30 days of not achieving my listing price. So if you're a seller, it's not zero sum. You don't either list and then sell over the ask and everyone applauds you. You can also list and a month later have to drop your price 15% because you were wrong. And so I think off-market listings tend to benefit sellers. So I think the whole narrative of like sellers should get more is silly. I think I do tell every seller, listen, there is a chance we could list this in the open market and you could have a bidding war. Last summer, famously, there was a property on the lake that had a bidding war, right? I wouldn't have expected that. I didn't think that there was a bidding war ensuing on a house like that, but it happened. So I would have been wrong in that case. But most of the time, I think I'm right. I think off-market listings provide value for sellers. I think they provide value for buyers because if the buyer's working with the right agent, buyer has visibility into properties that other people don't know about. And
Mhm.
so I think it's important. I think off-market listings are probably here to stay. There'll be fluctuations in them. They'll be more important or less important as time goes on, but they're not going anywhere. And I personally, again, I think they're valuable to both buyers and sellers. And I also find that a lot of the critics, there's an agent in our market that famously was very against them a few years ago and offended by the concept. And here's why you shouldn't do it. And then right now they have an off-market listing and they're telling people they have off-market inventory and they should sell off-market with them. So
But
it's just a trend. Everybody will catch on sooner or later. I think I was a little early in it, but it's
I,
probably here to stay.
I think some sellers too, they're very private people and they don't want their house publicized all across the country on the internet, and they don't want, people traipsing through their house. If they have a buyer that wants to pay their price, and it's a less hassle for them. It's more private. And also the way you connect people, you know what buyers are looking for, and then most of the lakefront owners, and even if their house isn't for sale, quite often you
Right.
find somebody, everything's for sale for the right price, right? So you're making those connections behind the scenes that both buyer and seller are happy. So
Right.
yeah, it's
So what's yeah, so
what's
no
the
harm, no
downside of
foul.
that?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you. And I think that's the right way to look at off-market listings. I think there are occasions, listen, I think if you're an agent that doesn't understand where the market is, because it's very fluid, Lake Geneva is super nuanced, right? The lakefront market's very weird. It doesn't follow necessarily sets of rules. But if you understand it in the way that I think I do, I don't think I have a buyer or a seller making mistakes when they do something like that. So yeah, I think they're important, Karen.
Yeah, for sure. The other controversial topic these days is just kind of development in this area. Um, obviously it's going to happen, and there's a lot of very strong feelings about development and the people who do that and what it's going to be used for. And obviously, there is such thing as good development, right? And responsible development. So what's your feeling on? I mean, you've watched, so you grew up here over the years, the change in this area. What's kind of your opinion on what is healthy development?
Yeah, listen, it's it's a struggle, right? And I think first of all, I think every development should be looked at through its own lens, right? It's like, what is it? Where is it going? What's the target, buyer for that development? How does it impact the community? But on a macro level, I think I look at development like this. I don't remember if you were paying attention back then, but in I think it was probably 2015 or 2016, there was a development that was trying to occur essentially in my backyard. And I'm not a NIMBY. I don't like that. I actually pride myself in not being a not in my backyard guy. But in this case, this was in my actual backyard. And I live in the country, very close to the lake, but in the country. And so I'm like, I see this development and it's really going to disrupt my existence. Like it's going to sort of really destroy why I bought and built where I did. And so I went rather crazy at the time about it. And I went on this sort of mission to dispel the rumors and the sort of just kind of lazy way of thinking that says if you're not growing, you're dying, right? That's something that people say a lot, right? You'll hear that about communities. If you're not growing, you're dying. It's like, how about no? How about that's wrong? How about if you're not maintaining, you're dying? So, but that's not the way people want to talk about it. They want to talk about growth is good. They want to talk about you need more taxpayers, you need more school kids, you need more, one of the common things in the world, the US anyway, is we like to build these big giant megaplex school systems. And then it's the argument to build them is, well, the kids need it, and then once it's there, that's the argument then in favor of development. Well, we have this school, so we need more kids. So it's like this, like, let's keep this ball rolling. Um, so number one, I generally speaking dislike development. Generally speaking, I think if things could stay as they are right now, that'd be fine. But I think the better way to look at development is to say we're all influenced by our own experiences in a particular market, right? So I was just arguing with somebody on Facebook about this, I think, in the last couple of days about a development that's currently trying to be, brought to Williams Bay, a very small one, which, by the way, I'm in favor of, even though I'm very much not involved in it. Um, it's sort of like if the argument I had, I'll just tell you about it, was with a person that I've known for a long time, and they grew up in Baywood Heights on Theater Road in Williams Bay. And their argument against this little tiny new development is that Williams Bay used to be a quaint town, and now it's not. It's like, all right, well, let's break that down. So you grew up in a development that in 1989 was a cornfield. And in 1991, it was a hundred some house development, and you grew up there. Well, your quaint town included that development. But if you'd grown up 20 years earlier, your quaint town had that development as a cornfield. And so you don't like that. And if you rewind 20 more years, like Willow Bay Woods, the condominiums in Williams Bay that now everyone thinks are okay, they weren't there. That was called Camp Willow Bay. And well, if you grew up prior to that, you would think Willow Bay was egregious. And so you just keep going back in time, and we all just sort of cement what we think things should stay like based on our own window into the community, right? And so I try to avoid that. I try to just say, what should development be, to answer your question? It should put like-kind products in like-kind neighborhoods. So if you live in the country and you live on 10 acres, I don't think they should put quarter-acre lots, or 1-acre lots for that matter, against you. I think the reason zoning classifications exist is to protect houses and owners. So I think if contrary, Williams Bay, of course, had the rezone of George Williams College, right? Which I was very fortunate to be involved in and represent the buyer. People lost their minds over that, right? And they said, well, this is our camp and this is our camp. And it's the possessive hour is tricky because it's not. It was private property. It's been private property since it was built. I couldn't go to George Williams College and just hang out in the cafeteria unless I were a student. So I had to buy access. Well, now we're going to have a hotel there with club memberships that I will have to also buy access to. Well, I don't think the use is dissimilar. I think it's still private property. I think now I could rent a room there if I wanted to stay there for a night. So I think you put like-kind developments with density against like-kind existing development with similar density. And I think if we follow that general development rule, I think you can develop a community out and be respectful of the people that are already in it.
That makes so much sense, David. I
I
love
don't know.
it.
I mean, that's just the way I think about it. I think it's most development is probably bad, but I think when you do see good development, you can't just always be against it.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it is a good thing.
Yeah.
So.
All right, last question, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you're pretty good at this. Predict this spring summer market up here. What do you think is going to happen?
Oof. I think, I've written about this for a long time, and you and I probably talked about it. I think Lake Geneva, to some extent, is just going to live and die with equity markets, right? I think if this geopolitical issue in the Middle East, spirals and it impacts our equity markets in the U.S., do I think that everyone's going to be in a spend happy mood in June if the S&P is down 10% from today? No, I don't. So I sort of, everything I look at with the market, I kind of just layer with what's the equity market? Like, what's the wealth effect? How are people feeling, right? I don't know how you act, but I act that way. Like, if the market has a terrible week, I kind of like don't want to go to Chili's and like, I'm not going to order an appetizer, So I think it's like, I think that's the number one overriding factor for Lake Geneva. But beyond that, I think you're going to see two things. I think you're going to see aggressive seller pricing, and aggressive, I mean very, very lofty. I think one of the problems is the market doesn't understand that pricing is not uniform. Pricing is suggested by agents and affirmed by owners, right? No one thinks a house is worth more than an agent trying to get a listing from an owner. And the second place person in that list is the owner, it's himself or herself, right? So you have an inventory battle occurring before a property is even offered to the market, and the price is being bid up before a buyer knows about it. And I think what's happened, unfortunately, in the lakefront, because we had that spurt of activity last kind of like it was basically like Labor Day weekend through middle of October when it all occurred. I I don't know if the market is intelligent enough to discern like a blip versus a trend. And so I obviously had a very nice off-market sale a couple of weeks ago. I think a lot of people are going to see that sale and be confused by it. I don't think the market price-wise understands the sort of value and the market importance that it we place on kind of the west end of the lake right now, right? And the west end does get a premium. You cannot pretend it doesn't. So I think the market's going to be fine. I think there's going to be the pricing dislocation is going to be more aggressive than it's been in the last year or two, because I think there's no inventory. Sellers are going to be listening to agents that are going to bid up their numbers. And so I think you're going to see some of that fail. I think some of it will succeed, but I think overall, spring and summer and fall market at Lake Geneva, I think is going to be just fine. I think it's going to look a lot like last year.
Right. And yeah, I when watching you price something is just very educational because you're very realistic. Obviously, you want to get the highest price, but you want to actually get the price and get it in the least amount of time, and you don't want, for it to have days on market and then have to reduce the price. But I think just all the factors that you take into account when you price something, it's a very great and scientific way to price. I
Well,
mean,
I
pricing
think
is always going to be a little subjective, right? But you want
right.
to make it the least subjective as you can by, looking at the past, looking at the trends, looking at, what we think is going to happen in the economy in the future. But I always find your pricing to be right on. So,
Well, and as you know, we've been wrong, right? I mean, agents in general are just so self-important, and I watched a video which was probably detrimental to my attitude for you when I got to the office this morning, and it was this realtor talking about a sale that was in one of the western suburbs, and she was sort of like standing there with a G-Wagon in the background, and like saying about how much strategy was involved and how much, how many decades of relationship building were involved in this sale. And it's like, really, lady? I think it was just the house was nice and the buyer bought it. Like maybe it was just that. And so I kind of look at our market and pricing wise and just say, yeah, it's vague. We've been wrong, right? I mean, we've been wrong on listings that we thought wouldn't sell, and then someone lists them way higher than we thought, and then they sell. It happens, and it's going to keep happening. And I just think as agents, I mean, we have to just be aware that the goal is to be the best we can be. You can never be perfect, because this lakefront market in general and the lake access market included is so people just don't understand how nuanced it is, and how sales don't live and die based on 100% accurate pricing. They live and die based on, is there one buyer that thinks that's right?
yeah.
And you have to balance on the listing side. Are we pricing this for the one person that just sold an electrical company in Ohio, or are we pricing it to try to sell it a couple times to somebody? That's the difference.
Yeah. No. Well, we'll see how the market's, it's starting to gear up already. I think, hopefully the weather will turn soon and we'll see even more activity, but we're getting busy, very busy here.
Yeah.
And so it'll be exciting to see. Well, I always end my podcast by asking, what is your favorite thing about living in Lake Geneva?
Oof. Um, Interesting response probably, but my favorite thing about living here is knowing what this area has both given me and what this area has given to my children and what this area has given to my parents. And so I think, you know, we all have a choice where we live, right? I mean, I happen to grow up here and live here and have never lived in a house more than 3.5 miles away from the house I grew up in, and in a way I can look at that in a way and find it to be depressing. And some days, like when it snows 7 inches in mid-March, I think this is depressing. What am I doing? But I like driving around and seeing the same things and seeing the change and knowing that that's where my buddy grew up and this is his parents' house and his parents are gone now. But that house, I played in that attic, and we stole some baseball cards. And like, I like having a history with an area because I think otherwise, listen, we could all live in just beautiful areas. If that were true, we would just all move to Maui and we would just live there forever. But I think where you choose to live is a lot deeper than that. And I think it matters to have a history somewhere. And so I think I'm a critic of this area, very outspoken critic. I think there's a lot of things wrong with Lake Geneva, but I think for me personally, what matters the most is that it's where I'm from, and where I'll always be from.
And it seems like a lot of people who left the area, they end up coming back. I've
Right.
heard my clients says, I've been all over the world and I
Yep.
came back here because it's beautiful and it's special to them. And
Right.
my love goes back generations too. So, most of the
Yep.
people here, there's a lot of sentiment tied to it. So, yeah. Well, David, thank you. This is probably the longest you've been away from your phone, which is probably in front of you right now.
But I've looked at it
But
the entire time. So no. Anyway,
so I appreciate it. I know you're dying to get back out there. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, Karen.
And as always, thanks to the listeners for letting me share my love of Lake Geneva and the wonderful people like David who help make it so special. I'm Karen Stray Rappaport. Join me next time as another guest takes their place in the sun. Bye for now.
I feel alright, like the morning I am golden. I can't stop the wonders from happening.